You asked for it and we did it. We finally did it. Alison and I have written our first Ancestral Kitchen podcast cookbook called Meals at the Ancestral Hearth. It's available now at farmandhearth.com/shop. It is an e-cookbook that you can download and start reading immediately, and you'll receive the link to two versions. One is formatted for printing and keeping in your kitchen, because that's how I read my recipes, and the other for reading on your e-reader or mobile device, because that's how Alison reads her recipes. Now, you know we aren't going to give you a prescriptive list of recipes that assumes you have access to a supermarket stuffed with globally imported processed foods. So, what is in this book, and how did we come up with these meals? That is what this episode is about. The desire for creativity and the need for adaptability with seasonal fluctuations, time constraints, dietary restrictions, and food availability. The recipes in this book are dishes that build the foundation of our daily kitchen rhythms, which we will talk about in this episode. These foods make up meals our families eat on a weekly and a daily basis. And of course, they follow ancestral principles for preparation. We included Alison's spicy lentils, cast iron ground meat, my turkey noodle soup, and sourdough pasta. And of course, we included the infamous lacto-fermented ice cream and the chewy jumbo sourdough oatmeal cookies. We also wrote a number of articles that can be found exclusively in this book, including Alison's thorough and detailed water kefir FAQ, my fresh egg preserving tips, the contents of our pantries, and so much more. In this episode, we will share about working around restrictions, catastrophic failure, and going off script with your cooking. Visit farmandhearth.com/shop to check out the book and look at the table of contents, or just check the show notes for the link. And thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Alison.
Good afternoon, Andrea. Hello, how are you doing?
I am quite well, thank you. I've got
Good.
a big mug of hot tea here, so I'm ready to settle in.
Wonderful. I think this is a settling in episode.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it is. It is.
So, shall I start with some good news, with something that'll make you smile? I've got a couple of reviews to read of the podcast.
Yes,
The
please
first
do.
one is from the UK. Hey,
Yeah,
from London.
nice.
From Jonathan Shaw, who sent me an email. And he said, I don't listen to your excellent podcast on a platform where I can rate it. But if I did, I would rate it 5 stars. I am
That's
quite
great.
new to it, but have already found it a super useful source of information. And I absolutely love that you don't sanitize details of, for example, traditional game carcass processing and making stock from the whole bird.
Mm.
Please keep up
Mhm.
the fantastic work of telling people where their food should come from and how to find it.
Oh, that's awesome.
So thank you, Jonathan, even though you weren't able to review on one of the reviewing platforms, because lots of our listeners don't listen in a place they can review. It
That's
was
true.
really wonderful that you took the time to email me, because although, you know, both of us have busy lives like most listeners do, just getting those emails and reading them and then, you know, having a little conversation, it really makes certainly me smile when that happens. And I know it does you
Oh,
too,
yeah,
Andrew, doesn't it?
absolutely.
And I've got just swipe and I will go to another review. This one's from Rebecca, who's on Instagram as A Humble Place. And she left a review on Apple for us. And she says, love it. Such a helpful podcast. I like to listen to it while I'm cooking supper to inspire me to try new things.
Oh, I
Thank
love
you,
hearing that.
Rebecca. And
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you for supporting us over at Patreon. Rebecca is one of our patrons, and we've got some new patrons as well. Let me go
Yes.
back to the list.
So
And
exciting.
yeah, we've had a kind of welcomed a lot of new patrons recently. The first one was Christy, and Andrew, you've got something there that Christy said, which I think
Yes.
I'd like to hear.
Oh, Christy sent me the most awesome message on Instagram. She said she walks outdoors every day, and she said, I've
Mm.
been listening to you and Allison on my daily walks through the frozen tundra, and it has been life changing. Literally not joking at all. Every minute I'm learning something new, and it has been so life giving. I can't even put into words what I mean. Words aren't enough. Thank you so much for using this platform to share your wisdom with the world. I am forever grateful, and I am learning so much.
Gosh.
I love that message. Thank you,
That's incredible.
Christy.
Thank you, Christy. And
Yes.
welcome as a patron. She's come on to our level with all the goodies, the $12
Yeah, so she'll
companionship
be in the
level.
Discord.
Yeah, in the Discord group. And also we
Yeah.
have Mela. I'm not sure I've pronounced that right. Apologies if I haven't. And Stephanie, who also have both come onto companionship. So they're get access to the Discord board and also to our live chats. And Stephanie came on at the annual 5% discount. So she's with us for a year, definitely, which is nice. And then we have Emily, who's come on at the sponsorship level, which is
Awesome.
a little less of a financial commitment, but still
Mhm.
incredibly appreciated at this end.
It makes a huge difference for
Yeah.
us. Literally, Allison, we actually wouldn't even be talking today if it weren't for the patrons
Yep.
because of the absolute technology headache that
Yeah.
people have no idea we've been dealing with. I mean, there was some very challenging moments where you got kicked off like 7 times during
Mm.
one conversation we were having, and, so
Hard to
thanks
record
to
a
the
podcast like
patrons.
that. Yeah, thank you,
Well,
patrons, for giving us the ability to have the technology to keep the episodes going. It's such
yeah,
a fundamental thing. And it feels
right.
amazing to have something that is reliable in front of me.
Yes. And I have to say, Allison, that I feel like if somebody wants to know if the dollars are being used well, then all they need to see is, Rob duct taping things to cardboard and realize that we're really going every extra mile we can to
Yes.
not spend any money
Yeah,
for as long as possible and try to
completely.
solve our problems in any
Other way.
strategical way we can,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
which is really awesome because it's
Yeah.
enabled us to stay completely within our budget. So,
Yeah, exactly. So thank you to those 4 patrons.
yes,
We
thank
are
you.
going to be talking about something super exciting today. And
Yeah.
if you are on the companionship level or above of our Patreon support network, you will get the cookbook we're going to be talking about in this episode. So
Ah,
that's exciting.
so awesome. Just a
So,
little extra thank you.
exactly. It feels so right to be able to give back as much as we possibly can to the people who are supporting us. So, yeah, thank you. What was the last thing you ate, Andrea?
Well, last night
Mm.
actually was a really nice simple dinner. I kind of actually it hits right on what we're going to be talking about today,
Mm.
which was made up of me and Gary spending most of the day outside working on things,
Mm.
and then coming in with no plan for dinner.
Mm.
And I had a Zoom call last night with my Young Living members.
Mm.
And so I wasn't, going to be standing in the kitchen all evening. So I got out some ground beef and put it in a like it's wrapped in plastic.
Mm.
So I put it in a bowl of hot water to thaw.
Mm.
And then Gary came inside when he came in from working with the tractor, and he cooked up a bunch of, he just looked on the counter and saw what we had. So he
Yeah.
cooked up a bunch of garlic and spices and things. He cooked the beef with it, made it into this really flavorful beef.
Mm.
And then he cooked a big pot of rice. And um, then he put rice in a bowl, beef on top, and then he fried an egg on top.
Oh,
And I
nice.
think you and Gary would get along quite well with the cooking of eggs because he's literally a master at cooking fried eggs, and he makes them so perfectly, and he's so patient. He cooks it at such a low, careful heat. I'm just kind of like torch it, try to get it done quickly. But he just goes so carefully, and he makes this perfect egg that just breaks just right when you cut it. And
Wow.
so it was delicious, but very simple dinner.
Sounds really,
So
really
yeah.
lovely.
What did you have?
Well, we're talking about the cookbook today, and not planned, just very coincidental. I had a recipe that's in the cookbook, and I
Now
didn't,
that works out.
I didn't
Sure, Allison.
realize. No,
Not
literally,
planned. My
we
producers told me.
I sat. We went outside to eat today. It's really cold here still, but the sun's out, and I could see there weren't very many clouds. And I thought, oh, let's see if we can sit outside. And I'm sitting out there eating with Rob, and I looked at my plate and I just thought, oh gosh, I'm eating something that's actually in the cookbook that I'm about to record an episode about in like 2 hours' time. So I had the cast iron ground meat recipe from the cookbook, which when you have a look at it, you'll see that it's really a jumping off point for whatever you'd like it to be. So I used
Yeah.
pork. So I had ground pork, which over in Europe is pork mince. And I put with it a lot of onion and some carrot. And then usually I put spices in, like cumin and coriander. I decided to go a herb way today. So
Mm.
I put in oregano, rosemary, and what was the other one? Thyme. And
Mm.
then I put some fennel seeds in as well because I like fennel with
Oh,
pork.
of course.
And then we had a massive, massive bunch of chard from the local cooperative this week. And so I chopped that up really into small pieces and then slowly in batches got it into the cast iron pan without it, just overflowing. I have to do a little bit and then let that wilt down a bit and then put a bit more in.
Mhm.
Some garlic towards the end. I like to kind of lightly cook my garlic sometimes, just putting it at the end. I think I
Yeah.
started doing that when we did the GAPS diet because it's recommended in the book to do that, and I quite like it
Mhm.
sometimes. So that was the cast iron ground meat, and we had that with sourdough bread. I had sourdough spelt
Ooh.
bread, which is the recipe in the cookbook. Again,
Yeah.
well, I generally eat that every lunch, as people listen to the podcast know. So it's not much of a stretch for me to be eating that for lunch. And lard on the top, a bit of salt, and a couple of spoons of sauerkraut on the side. Very
Oh,
nice.
that's so perfect. Oh, I should have put some sauerkraut on my bowl last night. I didn't even think about it.
Yeah, that would have been
Gary
good.
Gary served me, and I just took the bowl and ate it.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
It was perfect as was, but um, you can always throw sourdough on anything.
Yeah,
I mean,
sauerkraut.
sauerkraut.
Yeah, definitely. So I've kind of given it away what we're talking about today, but I'm going to ask you
Yeah.
anyway, Andrea. What are we talking about today?
Well, Allison, today we are talking about a cookbook
Yeah, yeah.
composed by ye and I.
Mm, mm,
I'm very excited about this, Allison, because we have been, you know how whenever you post something and everybody asks you, "Can you give me the recipe, please?"
mm.
And something that you and I have talked about is what recipe? I don't
Yeah.
know. We just kind of cobbled it together, and being able to, or having to, I should say, generate 3 meals a day for an entire family, which may or may not have various needs or
Mm,
wants, and having to do that all with, um, the restriction, if you will, of having just what you have on hand, not being able to like, you and I don't necessarily make a menu plan and then go to the grocery
No,
store and shop
not at
accordingly.
all.
We have what we have in our house, which is usually whatever was, at the farm, and then we plan according to that.
Mhm.
Um, so you can't necessarily say, "Oh, this cookbook says, go get," I don't know, just think of some random thing. I don't know what you buy
Asparagus,
from the store.
asparagus.
Sh Sure, yeah, yeah, you need asparagus, and then you go buy asparagus. Well, okay, um, it's December,
Yeah.
we don't have asparagus. Um, so you and I have learned to cook with, what is around us, and we've had to, get creative. And how do you generate all that nourishment while still feeling your joy and your creative expression or your deep satisfaction in the kitchen? And I know that women throughout history, certainly here in the US, we have the Great Depression, which is where some of our most, famous food traditions in America came
Mm,
from, those privations. And then in the UK, you guys had
mhm.
extreme rationing through the 40s and 50s, and I think maybe even into the 60s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the Nella Last diaries that I referred to before in these episodes, she talks about all of the um, rationing that they went through. So women have always had to force some sort of meal out of privation. It is not normal to have access to whatever you want at every time. And I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying it's not normal. So if somebody says, well, I want to cook ancestrally, but now I can't cook normally because I can't just go choose whatever I want. Well, now welcome to the normal world.
Mm, mm,
This is how it is. So you and I have had to learn that, right?
mm,
And every day on Instagram, I know I get asked and you get asked, how do you, I think people really want to know, how do you create recipes, not
mm,
just give me the recipe, but also it is nice for all of us who are coming into learning how to cook in a way that you maybe should have learned throughout childhood, but we didn't have the opportunity to learn.
yeah.
Because the generations before us were already losing their skill to the factories and the
Mm,
food plants. Um, being able to reclaim that ability to create from privation or create from restriction is, I think, a very good skill to learn. So all of the questions that everybody asked us about creating recipes and what is this, sometimes it's really nice to just start with a recipe that somebody gave you. Like Allison, that's probably how you started. I know that's certainly where I started
mm.
in many things, like with sourdough bread. I
Yeah,
didn't have any innate knowing of how sourdough bread worked. I worked very specifically from recipes, and then from there, I got sloppy and casual and
yeah,
like, "I can just throw this in there and do that,"
yeah.
because doing it according to the recipe gave me that experience where I could see what I was going for.
Mm,
So those questions created so much energy, and the effort you and I have put in for the last, I guess as long as we've been cooking, um, created a cookbook.
mm.
And this is a downloadable e-cookbook, which you and I both think is the precursor to a larger
Mhm.
cookbook. At first, you and I just said, let's make a little booklet with 3 recipes. And then
Yeah, then we got carried away.
obviously that that didn't work. But we wrote down, you and I both selected and put down some of our most core recipes that a lot of our kitchen behavior revolves around, as well as notes from our pantries and our kitchens about different tools and
Mhm,
ingredients. And
mhm.
today we're going to talk about how cooking ancestrally, which can often in the middle, in the thick of battle with the cannons going off around you and the kids going off around you, can seem like an uphill battle, but how it can be simpler and easier. And how with the restrictions we can actually have an advantage, and how 3 meals a day, 7 days a week can still be a creative act and bring immense satisfaction. And we'll do all that, Allison, framed with the
Hmm.
new e-cookbook.
Excellent. So it's going to be an
Mhm.
interesting episode because there's so many kind of things that play into it, restrictions and creativity, being efficient and keeping
For sure.
going, that three
Yeah.
meals, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, which so many of us have to do either
Mhm.
because, we have health issues or our kids have health issues, or we just believe in it and we can't do anything else. It really is a feat, it's
Yeah.
in the day and age that we live in, when we're juggling so many different things at the same time, keeping going, keeping
Mhm.
happy and joyful at the same time, it's a wonderful thing, I think, to
Mhm.
to be able to do that. And while we were planning this episode, yeah, Andrea, of course, asked me
Of
about
course.
my kitchen failures, because failure is a big part of
Obviously.
being creative and being
Yeah.
satisfied and playing in the kitchen. And we ended up comparing our failures, which we both have, and
Comparing our
also how we
failures.
save them, how we get back
Yeah.
into the game after we've had a failure. So later on, along with all these other things, we'll be sharing some of our failures and how we've recovered from
Mhm.
them.
Yep. That is very accurate, Allison. I feel like a lot of times you look at a cookbook or anything that somebody produces, artist work or something.
Mm.
Um, Camille was trying to build a house of cards last night and it kept falling down. So she's
Gabriel
getting
keeps doing
frustrated and
that.
she was like, yeah,
Gabriel's obsessed with
so
House of
funny.
Cards at the moment. Gosh.
Yeah. So she said, how come it's not working?
Yep.
Because Gary can build them really well. And she's like, you can do it. And he said, well, I had hundreds of them fall down.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole point is that it's hard to build.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times we see the finished product and somebody can say, oh, yeah, I tried so many things before I got this recipe perfect. But tell me about those, please. Because then when you have a failure in the kitchen, you don't think I'm a failure. You think this
Yeah.
failed and I'm going to keep refining it until I get there. So let's talk about our creativity and our expression and our efficiency in the kitchen because surprisingly all three of those things can go together. So
Hmm.
Allison, we spend a lot of time in the kitchen. My dad was over for dinner the other night, my dad and my mom, and my dad said he went to someone's house and he learned that they actually never cook. Every single meal they eat is out.
Gosh.
They don't cook anything, but you and I um are the opposite. The amount of times that they eat in is how much we eat out.
Yeah.
We just don't eat out much. And we have our habitual tools and our favorite pantry items and even specific dishes that then create like a dish is not like as in a dish you hold in your hand, but like a,
Mm,
a
mm,
meal,
mhm,
different like structures that then create this canon or kind of a corpus that we work from
mm.
and that then we have variations on a theme on. And I'll say, for instance, your cast iron meat.
Yep.
Um, you can follow that recipe with, okay, do you have venison? Do you have pork? Do you have turkey? Do you have beef? Do you have, bear, um, squirrel?
Yep.
New dishes can appear seasonally, as in you said asparagus,
Yeah.
for instance, and you can work the asparagus into something or make a blended asparagus soup in the spring or make something else in the a winter squash soup similarly
Mm,
in the winter, or a spice we've just discovered, or coriander if we're obsessed with that.
mm. Often I am.
And we already have a platform to
Yeah.
start working with them. So we'll
Yeah.
mention the pantries and the tools more when we talk about restrictions.
Excellent.
But
That's
why
good.
don't you talk about
Hmm.
our expression in the
Yeah.
kitchen?
So, you've just talked about how much time we spend in the kitchen. And I
Lots.
really believe that to avoid not liking that time, to avoid getting bored, to avoid feeling resentful about that time, we need to try to be as expressive as we can within the restrictions that we have. Avoiding staleness, avoiding boredom. And I look at the way that I cook now, and obviously, the biggest influence in my life, or the woman that I've seen cooking the most in my life, was my mum. Um,
Mhm.
and she cooked for us every evening, and she cooked different things. I think we had maybe like 10, 12 different sort of foods that went round in rotation. But there was no joy in what she was doing at all. She just kind of learnt those
Mm.
particular dishes, and she did them the same every time. And she knew when she went to the supermarket that she was going to buy those items for those dishes. And it just kind of went round and round. And I didn't pick up my joy of what I'm doing in the kitchen from her. And I feel like, that's something I've heard from mums a lot. Um,
Mhm.
there was a mother who we were friendly with when we lived in Cornwall, who had 3 children, and she was just like, before I had my kids, I used to love being in the kitchen. I used to make things for my partner
Oh,
and we used to
no.
have fun and play. But now I've got 3 children and I'm cooking for them all the time, and I just don't enjoy
Mm.
it anymore. And this is where I think expression's the key, because if you can use the kitchen as a place where you can express, then that slog in the kitchen isn't always a slog.
Right.
Sometimes
Sometimes
you
is.
do just have to bash it out, and
Bash it out.
bash it out. You're
I
just
like
like,
that.
I have to make these meals. I have to feed people, and you get on with it. But really, the more you can express, the lighter you're going to feel around that. Um, I do also want to say, before we move on, that I've always been creative in the kitchen, right from when I was young and overweight, as people who've listened to my backstory and our episode about it know. I used to make cakes. So I used to make marble cakes and all these types of chocolate cakes and other cakes. I've always been doing that. And then as I moved on and I lost weight, I started making different things. And then when we were all vegan, I was making raw vegan desserts. And all this
Mm.
time, for like literally 4 decades, I've been creative in the kitchen. But I didn't think I was doing anything creative,
Yeah.
because I had this thing in my head, well, that creativity's, well, it's art, isn't it? Or it's
Mm.
writing music, or it's writing a book, a story. I'm just making stuff in the kitchen, it's just a cake, or
Mm.
it's just a bread. And because I had this kind of idea that kitchen work wasn't creative, I didn't own it in the same way. I didn't
Right.
channel it in the same way. I didn't think about it in the same way. And so I want everyone to know who's in there cooking 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that you are
Yeah.
doing something creative. It is
Mhm.
art. It is a craft.
Mhm.
It is something that can be a method of expression for you. And thinking about it that way can sometimes shift some things in the way that you respond to it and the way that you feel. So I wanted to get that
Right.
side note in before we
If you
before
wanna
we carry
hear
on.
a little bit about the slog versus, creativity, do jump back and listen to the Easy Way episode.
Mm,
Allison, you did a good job expressing some of that when you talked about sauerkraut,
mm,
finding the
mm.
things that are the slog, if you will, and making them as efficient as possible so that you
Yeah.
have more time to spend on the things that you enjoy. And I agree, Allison. I think I have also always been or wanted to be creative in the kitchen. And in fact, there's a sort of a pivotal memory that I have when we used to go camping as a family. There's 8 kids, and my parents had a little RV, and we would go camping sometimes for a month at a time. But um, we were all still friends at the end.
Mm,
And my mom and dad say would be upfront driving. My dad driving, maybe my mom directing with the map, and I would be in the back cooking
mm,
because you can cook in an RV while
mm,
you're driving sometimes. They turn things on and stuff. Um, but I remember it delighted me so much to we had paper plates, okay? And then we
mm.
had things like little round crackers. They're called Ritz crackers. That's like the brand or whatever,
Yeah.
the name. And then Oreos, which are a chocolate biscuit.
Yeah.
Picky. And I would arrange them on the plate, like in these
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
spirals and things like that, and then carry the plate up to the front. And mom and dad were always so expressive of their appreciation. And obviously, it wasn't anything fancy. I was
Beautiful.
just, you know, but I was really enjoying myself, and it
Mm.
pleased me to show them hospitality in that way. And
Yeah.
I think, Allison, in some way, the book, I envision it as, if you're saying, it's just that is just not where my passion lies, then take take the recipes in the book and just do them, you know, as is, as
Yeah.
simply as they're written. And if you say, I do want to be expressive, but I really never, I grew up in that family that always ate out. I don't have any experience. And you can
Mm.
take the recipe and start spinning it. And then if you are very expressive, but you're also learning ancestral food, you could take the recipes and just, bounce off the side
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
So hopefully it can meet you wherever you are at.
Yeah.
And you and I each put 10 recipes in, Allison. So there's 20 recipes in there,
Yeah.
and each recipe kind of it could turn up on the table every day of the week, and you might not know it was the same thing.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Sometimes they
so
do turn up on my table every day of the week.
yeah.
They really do. But yeah, but
Exactly.
the boys think they taste different because I've changed some things, and they're like a different
Yep,
dish, you know?
exactly. Oh yeah,
Mm.
I've made things exactly what you say, Allison, where I know that I'm actually making the same thing. Like, maybe you make something with some pasta, like it's a noodle dish, and then maybe the
Mm.
next day you basically make the same thing, but you put rice in as the carb.
Yeah.
Nobody even knows
Yeah.
that it's the same thing, but in my head it's the same. I just put a variation on a theme.
Yeah.
So I thought at first, Allison, when you and I were doing this, I thought, well, Allison has, you know, I see how creative you are. And I thought you have so many things you could put in, but I have nothing that I could put in the book.
Mm.
And if you're listening to this, you helped me so much, because you, who follow me on Instagram and would say, when I would post a picture of something, can I have the recipe for that? Helped me start to realize that I I too was creating something, Allison, that could
Mm.
be a recipe, that I never thought of it as a recipe. So I was like, well, you just put this and this and this, and then you eat it.
Yeah.
It's not a recipe. It's just something you make.
Food.
But
Yeah.
but then if
I
you've
think
ever
there's
messaged me and said,
Mhm.
hey, what's the recipe? And then I said, I probably sent you back a voice memo that said, well, I've never written it down, but what I do is this, then you helped me discover that. So thank you.
Thank you. Do you love oats? Want to try your hand at a traditional Scottish oat fermentation? Suans is just that. It was made in Scotland for centuries and will give you both a creamy, easy to digest porridge and a tangy probiotic drink. My video course, Suans, the Scottish Oat Ferment, over at the Fermentation School, will guide you through everything you need to know to create these two ancestral foods in your own kitchen, no matter what equipment you have. Head to ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, SOWANS, or click the link in the show notes to get a 10% discount automatically applied. I think that there's a difference in the nuance between us, and that
Mhm.
really informs the way we are together on the podcast, because my what I'm looking for in the kitchen and in my life is joy, and
Yeah.
creativity is utmost to me. I'm
Yeah.
not going to put it over, my family, and I'm not going to put it over kind of keeping going. But creativity is really important to me, and I'm super curious,
Right.
and so I'll take
You
something
are.
and I'll run into some place with it. Whereas, talking to you and understanding the way that you are, I can see that
Mhm.
those things are all really important to you, but your kind of values in the kitchen and therefore in life are slightly different. So how do you feel in the kitchen as opposed to my joy, creativity, and curiosity? What do you um, get from the kitchen?
I feel like if I was looking for the words, that the words that come to mind is satisfaction and
Hmm.
contentment and safety,
Yeah,
which does feel like the obverse of your coin.
yeah, yeah. That's weird, isn't it?
Yeah. And I feel like you and I, especially given the name of the podcast
Mm.
and both of our Instagram names, the names we chose for our
Yeah.
representing our business here,
Yeah.
that we are standing on the shoulders of generations of women before us. This is what women always
Yeah.
did. Women have always created something.
Yeah.
Um,
Completely.
I actually, I
Yeah, go on.
just as I was about to say the words, Allison, I remembered specifically my dad saying, I remember driving home from church,
Mm.
um, and my dad saying, "Hey, Andrew, what's for dinner?" Because I was like, I had basically kicked everyone out of the kitchen and I had taken over for like several years.
Mm.
And so he said, "What's for dinner?" And I remember thinking, well, there's nothing really in the house. It's like at the
Mm.
tail end of we basically just did grocery shopping at that time. So I was like, oh, it's at the tail end of everything.
Mhm.
And my dad said, "Well, you always create something out of
Yeah.
nothing. So I can't
Yeah.
wait to see what you make."
That's
And
the
I
thing.
I remember that day what I made was something that we called maccachini,
Mm.
and it became like a family staple. It was just I found some noodles that we had. Okay, I cooked noodles. I found some chicken, and then I made some kind of a sauce that was like halfway between macaroni and a fettuccine sort of Alfredo sauce. I don't even know
Mm.
what it was. And then I dumped in all kinds of different like I chopped up veg and cooked them and stuff, and everybody loved it.
That
And
needs to go in the next
then
cookbook.
yeah, maybe. I haven't even thought of it in a while, but oh my gosh, everybody asked for it so many times after that, and it was just like, well, here's the scraps out of the bottom of the drawer.
Mm.
Um, can you tell me a little bit about the Welsh food stories,
Yeah.
Allison? Because
So
that's pertinent here.
this, I know I've been talking to you about this, and that's why it's coming into your head. It just feels like
Yeah.
another example of this was what women always did. I've been reading a book about Wales, and I'm about to interview the author for the podcast, so that will be coming up relatively soon. But
Mm, so
the
excited to hear that.
the Wales has very different territories, and so some areas were particularly steeped in dairy, and so they had lots of butter and lots of cheese. There were oats
Mm,
kind of everywhere, and there were leeks. They used a lot of leeks, and so they had a restricted palate because they were just using what was in the few miles around their house. And
right.
yet they come up with the most amazing foods, just from
Yeah.
oats and, lamb and butter and whatever they had around them. And the author of the book is really stresses strongly that these traditions, Welsh food, was held by women.
Hmm.
It was made by women at the stove with the
Mm,
food around them. And what they did was they took what the land gave them and they created all these wonderful dishes.
hmm.
And it feels exactly the same as what you've been talking about with, the US depression and what women have always done. In I'm sure every
Right.
territory around the world, ancestrally, that's what's happened.
Right. And I know to the modern, you know, ear raised under industrial factory luxuries, that can sound very sexist,
Mm,
to say that about women,
mm.
and maybe it is sexist, but not necessarily negatively sexist, um, because historically, most jobs were very much chosen based on your physical ability, and typically, men were more likely to be doing those large. I know there are ancestral cultures where this is not
Yeah,
not
yeah.
characteristic, but typically men would do those, those sit outside in the rain for weeks on end watching the sheep or whatever.
Mm,
And the women were pregnant, birthing babies, taking care of babies inside of
mm,
some sort of a shelter and preparing the food because that's where they were.
yeah,
Um, so we haven't always had the luxury of choosing who's going to get in the car and drive to the factory and sign the paperwork.
yeah.
We do live in a world now where um, a lot of things are more. It's more about your mental kind of decision making than your physical prowess.
Mm,
And of course, so I just feel like I should mention that.
mm.
Um, Obviously, you and I both know, Allison, that there are an insane number of very creative men, and in our patron group and
Yeah,
listeners as well. So I'm not ignoring those contributions. I'm just saying that's the general
yeah,
broad sweep.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Um, just like men. Men usually fought all the battles, but there were some very great women who led
Mm.
some armies.
Yeah.
And I'm going to mention something else, and I'm going to get a
Mm.
little farther, and I'm going to read a passage from the Nella Last diary that I feel like was pertinent here too.
Okay. Excellent. I just want to go back a bit to, you mentioned the Easy Way episode and that we talked about trying to be more efficient so we make space for being creative. And I want to touch on that a little bit because I feel that is a theme of the cookbook. So it's important, I think, if we're feeling boredom or listlessness or kind of resentment in the kitchen, to look at what we would feel creative around in the kitchen. So for some people, it's making bread. For some people, it's collecting flowers and fermenting them. For some
Right.
people, it's
Right.
making kind of all different versions of sauerkraut with spices and herbs. For some people, it's making vegetable dishes, whatever. Recognize what it is that you feel creative around. And then the stuff that you don't get creative pleasure out of, make that as efficient as possible to give yourself more time to play. So if, on the other hand, like I just said, someone might get creative satisfaction out of baking. If you don't, if you want to have your nice bread, but you don't get creative satisfaction out of baking, then just find one recipe that works for you and your family and just make it all the time. Make it in huge batches, make 4 of them. The bread that I ate at lunchtime was from a frozen dough that I froze and took out, and I cooked 2 loaves this morning with it. So make it simple and then save your creativity for cooking. And in the book, there is a sauerkraut recipe, which is a way that I've worked out that is an easy way to make sauerkraut, because I don't really get any creative joy out of making sauerkraut. I get my creative joy out of breads and beer and
You've arrived,
drinks
Alison. You've arrived.
And so I want to get that sauerkraut over and done with as soon as possible so I can get onto something else before I have to go and do something else, like, I don't know, some work for the podcast, or I'd go and do something with Gabriel, or go and do something with some Italian form somewhere. So I make my sauerkraut as simple as possible. So the book has that Easy Way sauerkraut in, and it kind of has a mixture of recipes that you can take, and some of them will be ones that you think, oh, this is going to be one of my kind of stalwart recipes that I can just bring out and cook each time, and I'm going to maybe make it exactly like Andrea makes hers in the book. And there might be other recipes that you look at them and you think, oh, wow, this is exciting, this is interesting, I'd love to play with this a bit. And maybe that's one of those recipes that fires you up and you think, oh, I like the sound of Andrea's lacto-fermented ice cream. So I'm going to go and get some like edible flowers, like I said, and mix that in. Or I'm going to try putting herbs in it. I'm going to make it different. And so there's a kind of between the 20 recipes, you can see the contents page for the book on the page we set up for it, which you can find at farmandhearth.com/shop. So you can see the 20 recipes in there, and you will see that probably some of them excite you more than others. And that's kind of what we were intending, that some of them can be staples and some of them can be other ways that you can, like you said earlier, jump off, use them as a jumping off point.
Yeah. So you can see the book there. Like you said, the table of contents is there.
Yeah.
The book is $12. You can download it. And I actually
$12
intentionally
$12.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. This is probably a better way to say that. For those of our listeners, when I've downloaded ebooks before, and you think, well, the ebook is $12, but then it's like $75 to print it somewhere because every page is full color, and like, your printer gives up the ghost at the end of it. So we wanted to have pictures in this of the food, but we put all the pictures on the last few pages at the end of the book. So if you want to, I've always wished somebody printing an ebook would do this. Make it so that if I want to leave the color pages out, I can do that. So you could just print this at home, or very, very cheaply if you wanted to send it out, because You wouldn't have to do a gazillion color pages. And that was intentional because of my personal pet peeve
Yeah,
of
no,
printing
thank you for that,
ebooks.
Andrew, because I just think it's a fabulous thing because I've literally only just got a printer in the house and I realised how much the ink
Mm,
cartridges cost. And if
yeah.
I print something colour by mistake, I'm like, oh, and really a whole
Yep.
book. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So you can literally just go online and look at all the
Yeah.
pictures, but then print out the recipes in black and white
Yeah.
and get a binder, put them in those and keep them in your kitchen. So, yeah.
Alternately, what you could do when I used to have to send everything to a printer to get it printed, they charge a higher rate for the color pages.
Mm,
So I remember printing books and you have to put in the instructions. So either everything's color or everything's black and white, or you
mm,
have to choose which pages. And it would be like page 1 to 3 is black and white, page 4 is color, page 5 to 7 is black and white. And it was
mm,
so because I didn't want to pay the higher
yeah,
price for every page to be color. So this way, if you also wanted those to be color, you could just send out the color pages.
yeah.
And yeah, that was our thinking there. We wanted to figure out how we could get the book to you as quickly as possible, ebook, obviously, and as cheaply as possible, black and white, obviously. So let's talk, Allison, about creativity and restriction and this idea of permission.
Mm,
This cookbook is about enhancing your creativity. All the recipes work with restrictions, and it's all about giving ourselves permission to be creative within what we have.
yeah,
What I mean by the permission is that, Allison, when you and I were talking about creating recipes, and I initially said, I don't have
yeah,
anything that I could write down, um, then I thought about how I told you there's 1 or 2 cookbooks I've bought in the past couple years, and I told you, oh, I realized I guess you don't actually need a new recipe to write a cookbook because they're just the same old recipes I've seen
mhm,
with a different name,
mhm, mm,
but they gave permission to change something. So, what I'm hoping that you find from this cookbook is that, like, I did struggle, like the lacto-fermented ice cream, for instance.
mhm.
I
You struggled with ice cream.
no, never. Ice cream is not a struggle. Ice cream and I are compadres. But I struggled with putting the instructions down because
Okay.
I didn't want to tell you what to do because I know that somebody will feel, well, I don't have that much cream. I mostly have milk. Or they might feel, um, well, I don't like using cane sugar. I only use a
Mm,
different sugar. I
mm,
didn't want to be prescriptive, but I finally realized I am talking to Sabrina and Colleen. Thank you, ladies, and my therapist helped me figure this out, that I needed to put something down that then you could use as your starting point. And that's what I mean by permission. I told you what I did. And as a child, Allison, you and I would, well, I'm fortunate that I did get this, but this didn't happen so much for you.
mm,
But cooking with your mom, she would be giving you permission.
mm,
A lot of us didn't get that experience.
mm.
And so, in a way, like take this cookbook into your inner child and
Yeah.
give that child permission to fail, to make disgusting things, to try to, experiment. Like as a kid, you would mix different potions up and then it was disgusting, but hey, now you learn. And
Yeah.
so we got to give ourselves that permission.
Gabriel
Can
still
you
does
talk
that,
about the
and it's fun. Gabriel still
Yeah,
does that. He mixes stuff
so do
up,
my kids.
and it's disgusting, and Rob eats it. But yeah, he's learning. He's learning. Yeah. What do you
And
want me to talk
there's
about?
something. Well, okay, so there was something that you remember I called you, well, on a Zoom,
Mm,
and I said I was thinking about making this Instagram post like a couple months ago, and
mm,
then we decided we would just discuss it here,
mm,
because I couldn't figure out how to get my words completely
mm,
wrapped around the idea. But like when you talked about raw vegan, it made me think about it.
mm,
And the truth for me is that the more restrictions you put on me,
mm.
the better I produce.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more creative I press up against those. Like the meals that, like, I've told Gary this, I'm all the time, I'm like, I'm staggered. If I give myself full permission to go to the store and buy whatever I want, I'm literally
Yeah.
paralyzed. But if I say to myself, I can only cook out of the freezer, what can you come up with here?
Yeah.
And I like start putting it together in my head. Those are the best meals we've ever had.
Yeah. I completely understand that. You know, it makes me think of Charlie, the episode we did with Charlie about cooking ancestrally in a van, because she traveled around Europe in literally a
Oh,
tiny
yeah,
van.
that's a good
And
point.
so she's just going to the markets and she's getting what she can. And she's got a tiny space, so she can't do anything really kind of elaborate. And yet she felt that she was perhaps the most creative she's ever been. And in that
Mhm.
episode
She did,
I
yeah.
did with her, we talked about how that's just the same really in so many areas of life. You know, when we
Mhm,
have those restrictions put on us, we have to call on different parts of our brain, different parts of our ingenuity, our creativity to put something together that we wouldn't otherwise. You know, so
mhm.
for for years before I started making sourdough, I was not eating grains, and I made breads with a lot of other things. You know, I wasn't not eating bread just because I wasn't eating grain. I
Obviously, we're not
yeah,
not eating
exactly.
bread.
I came up. They were all on my old website, but I was trying to think about them the other day. There was one with sunflower seeds and lentils and quinoa. I just came up with all these other different kind of
Wow.
things just because I wasn't eating wheat and I wasn't eating spelt and I wasn't eating rye, but I come up with
Mhm,
something else. And I really feel that more in Italy than I used to in England, particularly when I used to shop at supermarkets in England, because you can get virtually anything any time of year. You know, you can get melons in the winter and you can get green
mhm.
beans
Ooh,
and broccoli in
gross.
the summer. And whereas here, we've talked about this before, I think, you know, the broccoli comes in winter and then the broccoli goes. And I don't have broccoli
Mhm,
for 7 months.
mhm.
And then the Brussels sprouts appear and they're here for like 2 months and then they go. And and so
Right.
I'm using different ingredients all the time based on what's available from the local land. And then I'm using spices and herbs and different fats and different flavors to kind of play with all those different options. It kind of calls me to look at my spices and think, right, okay, well, my restriction is we got broccoli again, you know, for the sixth week in a row because there's just loads of broccoli. How can I make it different this time?
Huh,
Okay, well,
uh-huh.
maybe I'm going to use the oven instead of the pan, or maybe I'm going to kind of put it in the oven really quite high so it gets a little bit kind of crispy around the edge, or maybe I'm
Ooh.
going to put tarragon with it, or maybe I'm going to fry it in butter. You know, all these
Ah.
different things. The more restrictive I
Yeah,
am, the more creative I am. And when I just work with what's
100%.
around me, invariably I come up with the best things rather than trying, like you said, to take in every possible option available out there, like there is at the grocery store.
Yeah, it's actually too much.
Yeah,
It's too
completely.
overwhelming. I think that that's where a lot of people's burnout comes from is because instead of making 3 choices to get to dinner, you're making 1,000.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exhausting. Do you know how much dopamine it takes to make a
A
decision?
lot.
A lot more than I have.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that. I know that, during the Great Depression and during World War II,
Mm,
those are just 2, fairly recent history examples we can think of where people were severely restricted in what they would normally have. They, really forced out some creative options. There's some really weird recipes. I know some from British rationing as
yeah,
well, but
yeah.
also from the Great Depression where you're like, "I'm sorry, you mixed what?" But some of them aren't so good, and some of them are pretty good. I wanna read something from Nella Last
Yeah,
diary.
yeah, please
She
do.
talked a lot about restrictions, and if anybody which episode did we talk about that in, Allison? Jeez,
Oh
I can't even
gosh.
remember. Would maybe somebody
I think
remembers and they
was
can
it
tell
in the
us.
one we did last summer when we talked
It
about
was a while ago,
eggs? I
'cause I
can't
read it
remember.
last year.
Yeah, maybe last summer.
She talked a lot about using different bits of things, and all her food was pretty ancestral because she was still fairly pre-industrial where she was at in Barrow, down kind of by the Lake District where Charlotte Mason lived.
Yeah.
And she talked a lot about how she was just mentally doing gymnastics to come up with ways to make things. And do you remember, Allison, I told you about how she was serving this one cake that she always served with a cream sauce? That was their traditional way to have it. And cream, of course, was rationed, and
Yeah.
she made an orange peel syrup. And she describes how she used psychological warfare to serve dinner. And she said she put it on the table, and I just said brightly, I decided I didn't feel like a cream sauce today. I wanted to try something new. So I made an orange syrup. And she reports how everybody said, "This is the best way we've ever had it. This was so amazing."
Wow.
Or as if she'd come out and said, "No, there's no cream sauce. All we have is the syrup." They might have been like, "What a disappointment." So she says here in one of her diaries, she says, "I was in time to dash around drawing blackouts after feeding the hens 4 lovely eggs today. They're always such a thrill to me and seem much more wonderful than they really are. I'd the fire poked into a blaze from its banked up smolder, and my husband's slippers warm and tea ready to pour out when he got in tired out. We had, excuse me, we had stewed prunes, cheese, jam, wholemeal bread, and butter, and cake cut into thin slices. And my husband said, 'I wish everyone was as lucky as I was. I never seem to know there is a war on. You do seem to manage well, my dear.' It's odd to hear him talk like that, for he never used to notice how I managed and contrived and took everything for granted. Now he looks at my baking on baking day and says, 'All that out of rations? I do think you are clever.'" He says, she quotes him elsewhere in the book also as saying that he had no idea. He didn't even think that they really had rationing because he didn't realize.
Wow, that's impressive.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like I said earlier, I had a hard time putting my recipes down on paper because I make so many versions of them. I didn't even know what the real recipe was. Like, well, every time I make it, it's different. But also because I didn't want to give you a prescription. Like, I I have this weird abhorrence with telling people what to do, probably because I don't like being told what to do. And I wanted the recipes to feel more like a permission than a prescription. So if you get that feeling of permission from the cookbook or the recipes, then I know that we did our job. And again, you do not need our permission, but sometimes in the absence of the older wise women throughout our childhood teaching us in the kitchen, sometimes
Mm,
our body just has that feeling of needing permission. So we want to make sure that you get that.
mm. Would you like more support to help you eat, cook, and live ancestrally? If so, come and check out our community at patreon.com/ancestral kitchen podcast. We've got so many goodies over there that will help guide, inspire, and support you in this journey we're taking together. There's our exclusive podcast where Andrea and I talk more intimately about what's happening in our kitchens and lives. There are so many after-show bonuses, downloads, extra audios and resources. We have a forum where you can ask and answer questions, and we even host a monthly chat where we get together and talk all the ancestral kitchen things. We love cooking and eating this way, and this community and library of resources is what we would have wanted when we started out. Check out www.patreon.com/ancestral kitchen podcast to get started.
If you Now we've talked about the restrictions, Allison, let's talk about the pantry for a minute.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about your pantry. How much room do you have? Do you have a big walk-in lighted room with temperature controlled shelves? Of course you do, Allison. Tell me more.
So, I have a tiny kitchen, literally a tiny kitchen. It's just a corner of the
She's
room
not
that we
joking,
live
guys.
in
I've seen it.
upstairs. So we have one room that has the dining table in it, which is a beautiful second-hand chestnut table and a small sofa and a rug for Gable to play on, and the fridge, and one side of one bit of the wall is kitchen. And so I'm counting my cupboards, 2 cupboards under my sink, the double door under sink. Then I have one more double door cupboard underneath and one double door cupboard above the surface. So the only surface I have is literally the width of a double door cupboard.
Hmm?
And then I have space around the house, which is allocated for pantry stuff. So I have a little movable desk on wheels, and the cupboard of that has got grains in. Downstairs, we have a cupboard which has linen in on one shelf, but then we've got kitchen equipment and some grains at the top of that. And then one of the cupboards in our bedroom has grains in. One of the shelves that's supposed to have books on has ferments all over it. We don't have a very big space. In the kitchen, we have a very small space, but we use other spaces kind of strategically around the house. I've never really had a big kitchen. And I try to be very strategic about what I buy and what I keep. So, for example, I make a lot of spelt bread, as you know, and I noticed that if I bought 25 kilos of it, I could get it for a much better price than if I bought my usual 5 kilos. But literally, I just have a freezer that has 3 drawers in it. No chest freezer. It's just an upright freezer with 3 drawers, and everything has to go in there. So, frozen milk, lard, meat, breads that I've cooked already that I want to freeze, whey ice cubes, everything goes in that freezer. But I managed to strategically plan to get about 20, 21 kilos of spelt flour into that freezer and
Oh
leave
my
it
goodness.
there. And we've been eating it over the last 6 months. So, yeah, I have very, very little space, but I think very carefully about what I'm buying and what I want around me. And I've written about this in the book, well, these are the things that I buy in bulk, and I buy them in bulk because they're more economical, and then I keep them in the house. And then those are the things that I'm drawing on all the time, so we know that we've always got eggs in the fridge. You know that we've always got linseed in the cupboard, for example. I know I've always got rye berries that I can draw on. There's always things that I know are there, but I do that without much space. I would love it if I had more space, and maybe in the future I will. I think I'll still manage it with the same kind of frugal head on, and kind of take that pride in having just around me what I need and using it well. But I think there's this kind of perception that in order to be able to generate all these meals, we need to have a lot of space, and we need to be able to have all these things to hand. And that's just not true. You just need to understand how your family works and what you like and how you want to interpret that through what you make in the kitchen, and then work backwards from that and plan with that. I think that's what I'd say. You have more space than me
Mhm.
there, Andrea, don't you?
Yeah. And I think on your pantry,
Mm,
Alison, something that's worth noting
mm,
is that I used to bring in too many options. And it's not that I don't want to have options, but I just found that it was too chaotic, too many little bitsy things. And I would rather just have a couple big core things. It was
okay.
easier for me to work from.
Okay.
Because I was giving myself too many choices, just like at the store, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And when you have a very core pantry, I think it's easier to visualize. Do you remember I told you on the Joe Rogan episode where he interviews Joel Salatin? I
Mm.
don't remember. He's done 2 interviews with him. I don't remember if it's the first or the second, but um, Joel says, "Well, we need to get rid of supermarkets." And Joe goes, "Well, where will people get food?"
Mm.
And Joel's like, "From the farms."
Yeah.
But when you have a very broad diet made up of lots of complicated manufactured things, it's hard to imagine. But when you kind of boil it down to, if you will, recognize that there's some core staples that most everything revolves around, which
Mm.
is true even of people who shop at the supermarket, then it's easier to visualize. Okay, well, we go through a fair amount of millet. I guess I can find a millet
Yeah.
source around me, instead of trying to find a Pop Tart source around me.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so we have a lot. We haven't. I feel like this is a bad time for me to be talking about pantry because we have more pantry space than I've ever had in my entire life at this point.
Mm.
But historically, we have not had much. And I told you this before, Allison, maybe even in the Easy Way episode where I said, um, what I have found in terms of workspace, like a kitchen, it literally does not matter how small it is. It only matters how well sorted it is and if you can find what you
Yeah.
need when and where you need it. And I have worked in some of the biggest kitchens that were so chaotic and confusing. I could barely make a cheese sandwich. And then I have produced, like, from my kitchen in Virginia Beach, which was about the size of yours in terms of
Hmm.
space and things. And I butchered chickens in there. I can't process like hundreds of jars of food in there.
Yeah.
Um, I made ice cream for like vast amounts of people in there, like the huge Thanksgiving feast, but it was just because everything was sorted.
Yeah.
So we do have big freezers now. Um, we have 3 big chest freezers at this point, and right now they are stuffed to the brim with turkeys and chickens
Yeah.
and
Of course.
things like that.
Mm.
And Gary built me shelves in the garage for my jars to go up on. And I will report that this is the first time I've had shelves for my jars. Everything's always been stacked in boxes that I write on the side what's in the box, and then I
Okay.
have to unstack 12 or 13
To get to the
boxes to
bottom
get to
one.
the box
Yeah.
I need. Yeah. Yeah, you know this life,
Yes.
Allison. And so I don't want anybody to think you have to have a lot of room. I will say that if you can build shelves, woo, it makes things easier. It's a luxury, but it is certainly not necessary.
Mm. Mm.
And you you put more about your pantry details, Allison, in the book, and I'm putting some of my pantry details in there as well as some of a list of my favorite tools for if you want to do butchering and preserving at home.
Okay.
There are things you can acquire, but I want to be very clear that all this has been accumulated slowly over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years. Um, and there is certainly no need to run out and spend hundreds of dollars right out the gate just by, especially if you want to do lots of home preserving and butchery and things like that. There are some great specific tools, and I put those in the list.
Hmm.
And there are things that can make life easier that we don't even have. But if you have a couple core items, you can start from there, and slowly build your way out. But you certainly don't need to start with everything. And a lot of the way we started was borrowing things between us and friends, and then like right now we borrowed our friend's chicken plucker and their scalder for processing all our birds. We don't have our own as of this recording, but um, you know, being creative like that,
Hmm.
um, working together in community, you can even still then do lots of big, huge butchering projects and whatnot.
Mm.
Let's talk about the other side of permission. Permission would to try, which is permission to fail.
Yeah, completely. So, permission to fail. I feel like every recipe in the cookbook, if you fail at it, that's a good thing because
Yeah,
failure is something really that we need to, as a society, be more comfortable with because it's
I
what
agree.
creates success. It really is. And
Yeah.
and failures in the kitchen, if we take them lightly like that, can be funny and can be recoverable. So definitely the patrons that will get the cookbook straight off the bat, definitely, if you've got failures, post them on the Discord group so we can see pictures of them.
Please.
We have had so many failures. I remember, Andrew, you telling me you feed your failures to the chickens and you
Yep.
once had a bread that was like a brick. Yeah?
Yep. The birds couldn't even peck through it, so that was fun. We ended up later repurposing it to build a wall, so.
Bread wall. Okay, yeah, I know that one.
Have you ever had something you made, Allison, that was so bad you couldn't eat it?
Um,
Please say yes.
I don't think so. No, but it's not like my dishes are perfect, right? So you know that I'm cooking a lot of dishes with oats at the moment because at some point in my
Yes.
future there is an oat cookbook,
Oh,
and
please, please,
I've
please,
been
please, please.
experimenting with steamed oat puddings. So before people had ovens, they used to
Mm.
steam things. And so the first one I did, I don't know what I was doing. Just decided, oh, I'll put in 200 grams of this, 4 teaspoons of this, and put it all together, put it in. And then I went to serve it for our Sunday lunch, and I turned the bowl upside down, and the bottom fell out, and the top
Oh.
stuck to the bowl. I was like, oh,
Ah.
this was supposed to be a really nice thing to put in the middle of the table that looked like a nice steamed pudding, and now half of it is stuck in the bowl. So we had to kind of prise it
Well,
out and sort of plonk it on top of it. And it looked terrible, but it tasted nice. You know, I feel like we recover from our failures. I recover from our failures from it.
mhm.
So yeah, you've had lots of failures as well. I know it's not just me with
Oh, thanks,
steam.
Alison.
It's
Jeez.
not just me with things sticking to things and going
It's
wrong.
true. It's true. Becca, if you're listening, do you remember when you came over a couple weeks ago and I made this amazing chili that everybody couldn't get
Mm.
over how good it was? Well, I had cooked the beans, and then as the beans were cooking that morning, I was going around the house doing I don't even know what, and then I smelled that the beans ran out of water and
Oh,
they
I
burned.
got that.
So
I have
I
that.
rushed back to the kitchen, and I could just smell that charred smell
Yeah.
throughout the house. So I poured it into a colander. And yes, Allison, I picked out every single burned beans. They were black beans too. It was not easy to do
Oh,
this. But
black beans.
but when you interviewed Sir Patrick Holden
Yeah.
and he talked about the amount of food, obviously if something's disgusting, guys, I'm not saying choke it down, but he talked about the amount of food waste. And he
Mm.
said, you said something to him along the lines of, why do you think so much food is thrown away? And he said, well, I think it's because it's not even very good and people don't really value it.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I felt it like vibrating in my soul. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, because even when I almost destroy something, I will find just about any way to make it work because
Yeah.
I think, oh, how long I was outside picking this, or how long I was churning this, or how long it took, me or Katie or whoever is
Yeah.
milking the cow, or I'm not wasting this.
Yeah.
And the chickens are a very absolute last resort. I don't begrudge them their food, but when the food is valuable to you, and when it is valuable, and um sometimes that is in terms of expensive,
Yeah.
you paid a high dollar, or sometimes that's in terms of, you spent 2 hours cleaning the cow, milking the cow, straining the milk, and you just don't want to lose that valuable time.
I totally
Then
agree. And I think that,
yeah.
you know, just like your burnt beans, you were saying earlier on about millet. So we eat millet all the
Mm,
time. And quite
mm,
often I get that exact same thing. I'm like, I put it
oops.
on and then I'm somewhere else. I'm like, oh gosh, it's burning. And it's just that very first kind
Yep.
of scent of burn
Yep.
that you get used to.
Ah,
You're so
it's already
sensitive
too
to
late.
it. It's too late by then. And so often, sometimes Rob does it. He does it more than I do, but don't tell him that.
You'll never tell him. He's
No.
editing this, Allison.
Yeah, whoops. Um, and then
Cut this
we've
part
got
out.
a big part of millet, big pan of millet, and there's kind of a line of black burn on the bottom. And so usually what I
Mhm.
do is just try to take it out of the saucepan in as one piece as I possibly can, and then I'll just slice off the bottom, the bit that's
Oh, that
black, and
works.
get rid of that. The rest of it is fine, because
Do you put that
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 value,
piece in your
I put
can you
that,
put that in your
yeah, I put it
bokashi?
in the
Like the
bokashi.
for
Yeah,
Oh, good.
completely. Just open up
So
the
it is
bokashi,
gonna
put it
end
in.
up back into your,
Yeah, it's going to break down with
the
with the
the
lactobacillus
bacteria
and the
will
fungi.
digest the
Yeah, and
nutrition.
it's going to go in my soil in the end.
So
So it's
see,
going to
it's
grow
not even
vegetables
a
for me next year.
failure. You're
So,
gonna eat it in your beet stew the next year.
and it is valuable to me even as something burnt. But that
Mhm,
millet that's left in there that's not burnt is valuable to me because we buy millet in 5 kilogram bags and it's part of our order and it's our
mhm.
staples and I'm not going to throw
Yeah,
that away. And I feel like
yeah.
because I'm trying to think of a complete failure where I've thrown a whole meal away because I want to be able to tell you
Mm.
that that's happened,
I actually can't think of one either.
but I can't think of one.
I can think of things that we've had to re-engineer,
Yeah, that's different,
or
isn't
as
it?
you say, remove portions of. I've cooked chicken before, too dry, like
Yeah,
forgot it
yeah,
was in the oven or
yeah,
something. And then obviously I'm not going to throw away a chicken. So it ends up getting stewed,
yeah,
or I
exactly.
dice it into like microscopically small pieces
Yeah,
and put it in burritos or something. But it's really hard to dispose of it. I remember in Virginia Beach, my friend Beryl, who's so brilliant, and we were canning tomatoes, and I was using a couple different kettles, and one of them didn't have like a thick, heavy bottom. It was thin. So we had peeled tomatoes, which you know how long that takes, Allison.
Yes.
And it's tedious. And
Yes.
they're diced and they were, excuse me, I got like hiccups now. I was too excited. So they were in this pan, and then the pan burned on the bottom because the
Oh,
bottom was so thin and they weren't getting
gosh.
stirred enough. And I was just going to, like, curl up and die
Yeah.
because I was thinking of how many hours it was. It was a huge kettle, and Beryl said, "No, we don't. We don't just roll over and give up." She said, "This is fire roasted tomatoes, and you're canning it." Well, we canned those burned tomatoes, and let me tell you, I got more compliments on, "Oh, wow, these are so
Yeah.
good. They got that, like, fire roasted, blackened, just deliciousness," and
It's a
yeah, it was
reframe.
actually really amazing.
That's a
I've
reframe. I
often
like
thought,
that.
yeah, because if you read a recipe, you gotta lay them on a pan in the oven and basically char
Yeah,
them, and then you have
exactly.
to,
It's
like, deal with
posh,
them.
isn't it?
Yeah, well, let me tell you guys, just burn your pan and then can them. It's so much faster.
Can't really do that with millet. But if I was to fail at something, and if we do fail at something, because we've got that stock pantry, then there's always something else we can make for dinner. If there is a
Yeah.
terrible if there's a terrible disaster and we have a food emergency management agency is the pantry. FEMA, that's our
Yes.
pantry. That if there is a
Call
food
'em in.
emergency, that can come in and save us.
Yeah,
So
there's always a fallback.
that's enough about disastrous recipes, even though it's funny. But
No, it's
do
not, because it's fun.
do do post your pictures, and I will try to. No, I won't try to burn something just so I can take a picture.
Please don't.
Maybe if I do burn something, then I will take a picture and put it on the Discord,
Oh, if
perhaps.
Rob burns something, you can take a
Yeah, and
picture.
I could just say Rob. I could just say Rob did it, couldn't I? Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So I am aware of time, and we have to start wrapping up. So
I'm
the
unaware of time, so you'll have to guide me, Allison.
I want to just talk before we finish about having a creative starting point. I think it's fine for you to take inspiration from others. When I
Oh, yeah.
started painting, I did a course from a famous artist, and there were a lot of other people on the course. And a lot of the art that came out of that course from all those people looked very like the artists that we were following. But,
Mhm.
give those people, including me, 2, 3, 4, 5 years painting, and their art
Yeah.
looks completely different. You can start with other people's recipes, and that's how we learn. But you don't have to slavishly follow them if you don't want to. The recipes
Mm.
in our cookbook are there to be your creative starting point if you want them to be, for you to follow just as they're written, or for you to swap straight away, and for you to kind of take in and take into your body, and for them to be part of you, and then for you to start playing with them. You get to
Mhm.
choose how you want to interpret those recipes.
Right. When I took my yoga training, Allison,
Mm,
then, or the first one anyways, then I remember the teacher telling us, "When you start teaching, you're gonna sound like me,
yeah, yeah.
and that's fine. You're gonna use my isms and the way I structure classes and things like that." And she was right. We all sounded like her. And she said, it could take, people say in yoga kind of land that it takes 10 years to
Mm,
find your voice
voice, yeah,
as a teacher.
yeah.
And I noticed also, then I did some trainings where I was training people on some things, and then when I listened to them teach, they sounded like me.
Ah,
And I knew that wouldn't last.
mm,
They'll start to find their
yeah,
voice. And in the kitchen, I think that's where a lot of us are. We're going to sound like, taste like, look like our influence, and then we'll develop our own voice, and it will be nuanced by what's available around us
hmm,
and what our family actually eats
yeah,
and the size of pot that we have,
yeah.
the tools that exist in our kitchen, the time we have to spend on something. And I think that is my goal for this cookbook is that it helps somebody to find their voice in the kitchen.
Oh, and I want to see those recipes and all those
Yes.
different iterations. So the URL again is farmandhearth.com, which is Andrea's website, /shop. And you can go there, have a nose around at the pictures we've put up, have a look at the cookbook. It is $12 US. And it's simple to buy from there. Rob set it all up for us. So, Andrea, do you want to lead us out by saying something really wise about the cookbook to finish?
It's so good. I do want to encourage everybody who's listening, just like you encouraged me, Alison, and those of you who hounded me on Instagram, thank you. Please never stop. You encouraged me to write down my recipes, and it has encouraged me to want to write down more, and maybe tell the story of cowboy potatoes one day.
Yeah.
And write them down for our children so that they can recreate the flavors and the experiences of their childhood, and then we can live in the lap of luxury as long as they're at our home. I mean, train them to be able to cook on their own and have their favorite recipes written out as a guide for them to follow. And Alison, I cannot wait to make those naturally fermented Staffordshire oatcakes that you put in the book. I am so happy that you put those in there.
Excellent.
And yeah,
you'll be following in the footsteps of lots and lots of women who used to make those for the workers at the potteries in Staffordshire and sell them from their windows, which is wonderful. You were going to say Adelaide likes oats, weren't you? I remember you saying that's her favourite food.
I think she's got, I keep thinking maybe she's got a little of your Welsh blood in her because she wants the oats every single day for breakfast, and she doesn't want them different. She wants them the same way. And again, she eats them every single morning. And I was putting her in bed 2 nights ago. I read a story, and then she laid down and she said, I just can't wait to have my oatmeal in the morning.
That's so sweet. Well, I haven't yet told Gabriel about the lacto-fermented ice cream in your book, but I have never seen anyone lacto-ferment ice cream before. So that's the recipe of yours that I want to try out. I think
you'll like it.
For sure.
Yeah. And he can churn up all the flavors he wants, and that ice cream can take anything. Any herbs, flowers, like you said, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right,
well,
Alison.
Yeah.
All right, back to the kitchen.
Exactly.
Get back in the kitchen.
Exactly. I'm off.
We both have meals to prepare now.
Okay. Bye for now.
All right, bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at Ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.